focus of today is we're really looking at situations where your expertise stop carrying in the same way, where you get to a level where expertise is really not the deciding factor in progression, in influence and impact, and what really gets misread at that level when you get there. And one needs to recalibrate. My briefing today is going to be quite short. It's not a full masterclass like I usually do. Um, so this will be a short session. So in terms of my work, if you're new to me, my name is Buki Ishola. I'm a leadership architecture partner. And what that means is I really support people at the point where the role is changing, the exposure is changing, how they lead and what they bring to the table needs to be different. So it's really helping them to recalibrate leadership so that it holds at the next level that they have reached or they're aspiring to. So maybe where that is responsibility expanding, exposure increasing, and in a situation where their leadership is now being interpreted differently and they need to recalibrate. So you may recognize yourself in this, right? That you are at a point in your career where you are still delivering at a high level. Um, you're still delivering at a high level, but you recognize that your thinking isn't quite shaping outcomes as you would want them to. Discussions are moving on without hankering to your position, even though you are the expert in the room and you're the one supposed to be making the recommendations and really steering the ship. But in the context where you are in a place where you are in a multifunctional group, you see people who ought to have less influence actually driving the direction of things. That's what we're here to discuss. So, and you may recognize some of those points, and if you do, just make a note of it because we can explore that as we go ahead. So you may find that decisions are landing slightly away from your recommendations. Your influence feels a little inconsistent. You're still delivering at a high level, so nothing is wrong, but you sense the shift. You feel the shift. And let me know, does any of this resonate with you? Is any of this coming across in how you are experiencing your role at the moment? It's very important that you see yourself in this so that it becomes more relevant. What's underneath the experiences? What is a real shift that is taking place? And it's really about the fact that, you get to a level where the room is no longer evaluating you as an expert, right? That is taken as a given. It is now interpreting you as a leader. And um, leadership interpretation follow different rules. As an expert, another question is this correct? Is this technically strong? When you move into the role where you have actually been evaluated as a leader, people are often asking, often unconsciously, do I trust this person's judgment? Um, does their perspective hold weight in the room? Can I back this up? Does it align with broader priorities? Can I stand behind the decision? So it's slightly different from whether it's right or wrong, but it's seen in a different context. And we're going to get stuck when we have our expert hat on, and that's what we are, that's what we're relying on purely to drive the outcomes that we want to see. Think about it. Where are you, are still approaching situations as an expert, not a leader? And what do you think people are interpreting about your leadership, your readiness for the next level based on that? Now, where many leaders misjudge the shift. So we've talked about the shift happening. You've been interpreted as a leader rather than just an expert. The fact is, whatever made you effective still exists. So expertise never become irrelevant. It's still irrelevant, but it's no longer carrying the influence. And often what I see is like people just don't make that adjustment quickly enough. right? That adjustment from expertise, from seeing yourself as an expert and seeing yourself as a leader within the broader context of the organization and the function that you perform in your role. So, and sometimes people adjust the wrong way, or they don't try to even make any adjustments. They double down on what it is that they have previously been doing that has worked, and will explore some of those. So I want you to, really pause and think about it in your role where things are shifting. You recognize the shift I shared earlier. What have you done? What have you tried to adjust so far? And how is that adjustment working? We'll move on to the next slide. A common response that I see when leaders is your response when your influence isn't landing, your impact isn't landing, is to give more detail, give more analysis, more justification, more convincing. Um, you find things just, that's when you get into the really, really long email chains, a lot of back and forth, not really making progress, circling the same point. And you find yourself in a position where you are making more effort to bring people along. And so the overall overhatching thing in the response is really to provide more detail, to go into more depth. But really, in cases where influence isn't landed, it's rarely about depth. The issue is not about depth. It's really around something really more structural. So, my question to you is, of those lists, of the list you're looking at, which one do you more naturally default to? Which one do you more naturally like lean into? Which one do you naturally lean into? So this is happening. How does it show up in our day to day? And I think there's like three stages of the signals. Well, you have the early signals where decisions are being revisited. Like I said earlier, you make a decision, you agree. A week later, you are back discussing the same thing. Things haven't moved on. People haven't taken actions. They're reopening recommendations that were made. You have more back and forth. You stakeholder resistance. And I think, and so those are the early signals. And you move into something a little bit more structural where you start to notice being left out of meetings, not being consulted on decisions. You're finding out about matters quite late. And I think, and then the last stage is, I think this is the more severe, and this is the one that really starts to change things in the negative. And these are the relational signals. And these are important because often our success in the corporate world is tied, closely related to the strength of our relationships. So where you start to see where supporters are becoming less visible, less supportive, less vocal, uh, uh, for example, you're in rooms and people that should be backing your position are quiet, they're hesitant. Those are signs that things are quite not going in the right direction. And you find that you have to lean into really asserting your position. You're reasserting using your authority. The best authority to use is an indirect one, the ones where you have to start claiming and reminding people of your role and reasserting your position. That's not the ideal way to use your authority. You want to use it more subtly. Okay, so this is how it shows up where we're not making that shift strongly enough from being an expert to a leader whose recommendation is welcomed. It's and it's being used to shape outcomes and decisions. So out of those three stages, what would you say that you are saying in your role? Yeah, the early signal stage, structural shifts, relational signals. Which one is coming up for you more? A lot of times, this changing dynamics is then misread as either sometimes you notice people giving you feedback or even your interpretation of what's happening. We might place it down to being a communication issue, a stakeholder management gap. It needs to be more collaborative. It needs to bring people along more. A style or personality mismatch, a lack of alignment. Um, these are surface level issues, right? What is really, and often this is what people mention, what you sense, the surface level feedback that people give. Sometimes that is maybe deliberately masking the issue. They understand what the issue is and they just give this feedback. And other times, people can't really articulate what's going on, which is where your own awareness, your own work, investing in yourself to truly understand how you are coming across, how you're landing, and what may be getting in your way really matters. So again, I'm going to invite you to think about, this list. Which of this as is showing up for you, whether it's what you are sensing or is the feedback that others are giving you around how you are landing in your roles. When we are not having that influence, when we are not making that impact we want to, what is really happening? I think there are three main areas. What sits underneath is your authority is not fully carrying, whether it's the fact that you are not owning your authority or the room isn't recognizing it. It could be both, the room isn't recognizing it. Also, it could be that your judgment is not being prioritized. And finally, that you are unable to unable to move people into execution. You could have a very senior role, but you don't have anyone reporting into you. So you are, you're an individual contributor, but at a really senior technical level. And even at that level, you cannot deliver on your own. You have to be able to get people and influence people indirectly without formal authority over them. So this is what's happening beneath it when we are not having the impact that we want to make. I want you to think about bring a scenario to your mind now. Think about a recent meeting where your thinking did not land as expected. In that meeting, what did you do next in that meeting? Often, clients might tell me, I spoke and everywhere just went quiet. There was no response and things moved on. What did you do next? Did you explain more? Did you add more detail? Just bring a live situation to mind. And if you want to make any comments in the chat, then feel free to add that as well. And think about it. What would you have looked like if you had more authority or if your authority fully carried in the moment? Because if you're in a role where you are already positioned to make recommendations, then you already have a formal authority, right? But the issue is the formal authority isn't translating into impact, it isn't translating into influence. So if your informal authority carried, what would that look like in the moment? And really bring that to mind. Let's think about another situation. Uh, so think about an ongoing issue. Is your authority where your thinking is not cutting across, right? Is your authority carrying in the room? Is your judgment being prioritized? And is execution moving forward as expected? Are people respecting your views? Are they consulting your views? Um, are people quoting your judgment? Is it seen as tackling the big issues and what's relevant for decision making? When this is happening, when what the real thing that we need to work on, when that hasn't been worked on, um, what then happens is that our impact does not fully land. Your influence is less consistent. Your influence is depending on who is in the room. You might be able to influence downwards, but you're not able to influence upwards. But being able to influence upwards is really what drives your career. And often being able to influence sometimes some of those difficult stakeholders who are usually the ones that can really like make or break the projects. So we said earlier, you have to work harder for the same outcomes. Decisions take longer to move through the system. Leadership starts to feel heavier than it should. Progression becomes harder to sustain. Um, for most of my clients, they really know how to pick up their career. They still want to progress. What that means is that throughout the career journey, they are continually really recalibrating their approach, their leadership. I call them inflection points. Like, for example, moving from being and really an expert individual contributor to a leader. That's an inflection point. I know in this session, I'm not really delving into people leadership. I'm really focusing more on leading as an expert, leading effectively as an expert, ensuring that your expert contributions are landing and moving things forward. And that requires a level of recalibration in our approach. Mm. So when does this need for recalibration typically appears? I alluded to it a short while ago, when you're stepping into broader responsibility, when visibility is increasing, when decisions carry more weight. And when something feels off, but it isn't clearly understood. So earlier, you're noticing the signals, whether it's the early stage signals or the structural signals or more of the relational signals. Supporters are not as sponsors, supporters are not really as committed. That's when to really pay attention. What's changing in my approach? What needs to change? What has shifted? How do I need to respond? But the reality is, we do not lead, even we do not lead the same way all through our career. We do not approach things the same way all through our career. Most people know that. Like when you're moving from your first maybe promotion to manager, you know that, but even as we moved through the leader grade, it's how are we continually recalibrating our approach, how we are bringing authority into the room, how we are landing our decisions, landing our recommendations so that it resonates. All of that require continuous recalibration as the rooms, as the seniority of the rooms we're in really begin to change. So, which brings me to the point around like really what we're talking about here is leadership architecture, where you're looking at the fabric of your leadership, the operating system by which you are leading, and seeing that actually, it's not just about getting the work done, getting things done through people. It's really looking at these three areas that form that makes your leadership effective, that allows your expertise to truly be referred to, be consulted, and have it really influence the decisions that you have to make. So it's not leadership is not just about capability, and it's certainly not just about those leadership competencies. Like it's deeper than that. So is around whether your authority is carrying, and often I would, speak to, uh, tell people around your own you self-authorizing yourself, because often we can be promoted, you're promoted to, I don't know, senior director, head of department. But psychologically, you may little bit still be a bit behind that role. You haven't quite caught up to the level, psychologically and behaviorally, you haven't quite caught up um, to the role that you are now in. Behavior and conduct is a little, one step behind. That's certainly going to impact how your authority is carrying and how your judgment is landing in the room. Right. Okay. So what is the work that we really need to do here, right? When if this is resonating with you in terms of the signs that you're seeing, the experiences you're having in rooms, is really looking around and seeing what is identifying what is structurally strained for you? What is structurally strained for you? And really deliberately recalibrating how you need to show up at the new level that you're at. There is always a structured way to recalibrate our approach, to recalibrate how we are leading so it really lands. If this briefing, a few things that I've touched on here, if this is resonating, if it reflects your current reality, then you'd recognize yourself in this and you know if it's worth having a conversation and happy to have a conversation further around these ideas and what may be relevant for you to implement in your role.